Marketing your dental hygiene career. Part 2, building your resume. Your job hunting materials. Now, you have created hopefully a really good personal brand. You've kind of put together all the different pieces that you need to be able to help articulate what it is that separates you from the competition, what makes you different and unique and special. Now that you've done that, it's time to start putting together the job hunting materials that you will use that information in. And the first one, the most basic of all job hunting materials, is your resume. Now there's other things as well, such as a cover letter, letters of introduction, thank you letters, notes, LinkedIn profiles, testimonial sheets, postcards and business cards that I consider to be basic job hunting materials. And we're going to talk about those in a different video. And then we also have in a third video, the fourth video rather, are your advanced job hunting materials. Those are going to cover, we're going to cover things like resume website, social media profiles, your resume video, a cars sheet, which has a kind of a unique position, a way in which you can stand out, a 90-day plan sheet, post-job interview follow-up sheets. These are advanced materials that we're going to talk about in video number 4. But again, we're going to talk about resumes in this particular video because it's such an important topic and there's a lot of information to share with you. But really quick, there's 2 quick privacy tips I want to share with you on all your materials, and that is that you only need to share your email address and your phone number on your materials as direct methods of contact for employers. It used to be that people would put their full address, but for privacy reasons and also because employers will use that against you if they feel like you live too far away from their office. It's best just to keep your address off of your resume. Number 2 is if you don't want to share your phone number even, you can sign up for a free Google Voice account. That's a separate number independent of your cell phone number that you can have routed to your cell phone. So you have basically 2 phone numbers, one that is for job hunting through Google Voice that's free, and your regular cell phone number. You would just share the one that's the Google Voice number, and you can share that with anybody on your resume and other materials. And the cool thing about it is it also has features such as voice messaging and texting. So you can utilize that as a separate line, a hotline, so to speak, for your job search. Now, first, another important concept to get across is that there are certain rules when creating these materials. Number 1 is that you don't want to have any errors. You want to ensure that your grammar, your writing structure, your spelling, your punctuation, they're all accurate, as close to 100% as you can. You want to utilize at least one friend that you trust to be able to proofread your materials. And if you can, you ought to have at least a couple of people to do that, because I think that will help you feel a little bit more comfortable about catching everything. You can ask them to not just proof for mistakes, such as spelling and things, but also just kind of the overall flow and to get their impressions on the overall appearance of your resume if they feel like that's a good approach for you. And then the last tip I'll give you in terms of making sure that there's no errors or mistakes on your resume is that you read each line backwards. So you start at the end of a sentence and you read each word backwards. Sometimes our brains will play tricks on us when we read things over and over and over again. Reading through them, our brains will tend to put information into the sentence that isn't even there, or it will fill in gaps when there's a mistake there. And so one way to correct that is to read it backwards. That forces your brain to focus on each word at a time and thus helps you catch mistakes. I got to move quickly because this is a deep topic. We've got a lot of information to share on, but first thing I want to get, the next thing I want to get across to you is the difference between CVs and resumes. How are they different? Well, a CV stands for curriculum vitae, and that is a Latin term that means course of life. Resumes and CVs are pretty much the same thing. There's not a not a ton of difference, but there are some differences. So I'm going to point those out. In Europe, European countries, they tend to use the term CV as opposed to resume, as do academic institutions in the United States and Canada. They'll refer to your resume as a CV. So don't be too alarmed by that. Don't think that you have to have two separate documents. In most cases, you don't. There are some subtle differences and some things that you want to pay attention to, such as CVs tend to be a little bit more along the lines of lists, whereas resumes tend to be a little bit more of a narrative of sort of describing your experience. CVs also tend to place a little bit greater emphasis on the expanding the education sections or placing them in higher positions on the page. Resumes tend to be a little bit tighter, a little bit shorter in length. There are two basic styles of resumes, one called a reverse chronological and the other called a functional. And I'm going to go over those here in a second. But just know that there is subtle differences between a CV and a resume. And if you're applying for a job as a teacher, as an educator in an academic institution, you may want to tweak it a little bit to match what they're looking for. But essentially, a resume will probably work in a lot of instances. So it's best just to create a resume and then tweak it to be a CV if you need to down the road. But for clinical dental hygiene, resume works just great, and don't need to do anything more than what we talk about here in this video today. Again, we're talking about two different types or styles of resumes. The first is the reverse chronological style resume, and then the second is the functional. They are largely very similar to one another. Both have a header section. They both have sort of an opening summary statement at the top. Both of them have a work and education sections. Both have additional information that you would provide, such as certifications and maybe volunteer work and things. The difference is in how a person's skills and experience are displayed. So for example, as you can look at on the right, what I have here in front of you is a reverse chronological resume. And you'll notice that for each job listed in the work history, this person has 4 of them listed. And this is a fictitious person, by the way, so don't worry, I'm not sharing with you somebody's resume. This person has listed under each job sort of a short description and then a few bullet points of key highlights that they performed for that job. That's the key difference between a reverse chronological, which is what this is, and a functional style resume. So in a functional style resume, you'll notice that the skills and experiences are not under the work history. They're off to the side in the right section, and they're all kind of put together. So you have your work history of 4 or 5 dental hygiene jobs, and then to the right, you have all the skills that you used and you acquired at all of those jobs. It's kind of an aggregate experience section. So functional style resumes work really, really well for a couple of different kinds of job seekers. Number one, new professionals. And then number 2, professionals that largely do the same type of thing for each job. So that works perfectly actually for dental hygiene students or new graduates that are just coming out of school to use a functional style resume as opposed to a reverse chronological resume. If you use a reverse chronological and you're just out of school, you haven't had a work history within dental hygiene yet, you're going to have to put bullet points that might not be all that relevant to dental hygiene, to a clinical job. And so this functional style allows you to put your competencies, your skills, your training into this one large section, even though you haven't worked professionally as a dental hygienist. Allows you to be able to still highlight that information, those abilities in their own section. and not have to worry about putting information in that isn't relevant to the job. And then also likewise for people who have worked for a long time as a dental hygienist and only as a clinical dental hygienist, it also gives you the ability to save space. So for example, if you have, as the example in this resume, there's 5 different job listings there. Each one of those job listings are clinical dental hygiene jobs. And so most of them are probably going to have a lot of the same types of things that you do from job to job. And so to save space, this functional style resume allows you to put all of that information, all those skills, everything that you put into your career as a clinical dental hygienist into this one section to the right, or it could be designed a different way, but it basically has a general section of those skills. So it saves you space and helps you to be able to avoid being redundant for each job, the different things that you did, the different skills that you've acquired and utilized. Now, there will be times when a reverse chronological resume will make sense for a dental hygienist. For those who kind of bounce in and out of clinical work, or those who start in clinical and then leave, it's a reverse chronological style might make a lot more sense. If you are a dental hygienist that worked for the first 5 or 6 years in clinical practice, but then go into dental product sales or academics, practice management, consulting, speaking, research, insurance, other professions entirely, you're going to want to probably talk about those different jobs and what it was that you did at those different jobs, because they're not going to be the same as what you did in clinical dental hygiene. And so that at that point, a reverse chronological style resume makes the most sense. So let's go ahead and build a resume here right in front of you. I'm going to use the functional style resume because I feel like, again, that's going to be the most applicable to what we're talking about for you today. But again, the differences aren't huge. They're just kind of what I just pointed out. So just kind of keep that in mind as we build this. The first section is called your header section. That's where you're going to put your name and your, your contact information, and then also a small header to describe who you are. So in this section, again, just very basic information. Again, not your full address. We don't want to include that for privacy reasons, and also if they want to use that against you, we don't want to put that in there. So just put your basic contact information. You may also want to include LinkedIn address. That's an option. Another option might be your photo. Some dental hygienists feel as though that's something that's important that they would like to incorporate into their resume. I as a consultant, I give people that option. I go 50-50 on it. I think there are some advantages to it, and then there are certain disadvantages to it. So I leave that up to you to decide. And if you want more information about that, I can share it with you offline. But just know that that's another option. You could include your photograph up there in that header section. The next section is sort of what I call the About Me or summary section. This used to be called a objective statement in older resumes. If you Google resume and you see a bunch of samples of resumes, you'll see on a lot of them that they entitle this section objective. But a lot of resume writers are getting away from that because it tends to kind of state the obvious. You're looking for a job, right? And more of a summary statement, a personal brand statement. I'm using that term again. Using that personal brand statement or about me statement or summary statement about you gives you a chance, one more chance, to be able to talk about who you are or what they can expect if they hire you. It's just a very, very short sentence that is about, or statement that is about 1 to 3 sentences or 40 to 60 words. You don't want anything longer than that. You want them to be encouraged to read it, and if it's shorter, it's going to be encouraging for them to read it, and they're going to get the gist of who you are, the essence of your personal brand from that statement. In this particular example, I say, with 3 years of dental assisting experience and 2 years in retail customer service, I am uniquely qualified and prepared to work as a clinical dental hygienist. Along with my work history and clinical training, you will find that I am personable and friendly, hardworking and loyal, and work well in team-oriented environments where creating excellent patient experiences is valued. So something really short, just impactful, hits your brand right on the head, so to speak. Next section down is your, if we're talking about a functional style resume, if this were a reverse chronological, we'd go right into your work history. But if this is a functional, we're going to talk about your skills and your experience. These are a short series of bullet statements that begin with a verb and that lead the reader into your skills, your experiences, and your accomplishments. If you're short on accomplishments, if you haven't had a lot of experience, then you're going to focus on your training and your skills, what you do know how to do. So, for example, writing that one bullet might read, proficient in oral anatomy and instrumentation. That might be one bullet you would use. But again, describe your expertise in each area of clinical work. Focus on what's unique about you. Make it so that they get a really good feel of who you are, your essence as an employee. And also you want them to know that you really know your stuff, that you're not just a novice at it, that you're an expert at it, you're proficient at it, you're excellent at what you do, you're effective. If you're not particularly proficient in one area or aspect of clinical dental hygiene, let's say you don't have any software experience. Most hygiene students, I think, do. So this might be a bad example, but if you don't feel particularly efficient, then just leave it off and until you do feel more accomplished. That's something you could set as a goal. The next section, or rather, let me expound on this section. As your career progresses, you're going to want to morph these bullets and skills into more results and accomplishment-oriented content. So, for example, generated more than 10,000 per week in hygiene production might be something you would want to include, or chosen as Employee of the Month in January for providing excellent service. So it's just a way in which you can put out what things that you've accomplished so that employers can bridge the gap between what they can expect from you when they hire you. They can understand, okay, I'm going to get this type of an employee that produces, that gets results, that has accomplishments. You want to bridge that gap. The next section goes into the work history. And again, keeping it really, really simple. Your work history only needs to list the name of your office, the location of it, your job title, and then the year that you started, the year that you ended. You could include months in there if you feel like that's something that would be helpful. Some government positions, they'll request that you have that information. They'll also request how many hours a week that you put. Most private practices aren't going to ask for that information. They just want to know a general idea of what your work history is. So create a simple format that they can follow. They can easily trace where you've been, how long you've been working, and that sort of thing. And then use bold and italics and other things to kind of set things off a little bit to create a little bit more interest and draw the eyes in a little bit more. Next thing on your functional resume is the education history. Again, follow a very, very simple format similar to the work history where you list your the college or university that you attended, where it was located, the degree that you earned, and then the year that you graduated. You could also add other things such as scholarships, maybe some of your accomplishments, your GPA, levels of honors such as summa cum laude, other things. You don't have to include your high school. In fact, I would recommend that you not include it. It's kind of a waste of space, to be quite honest with you. If you have a college degree, it's generally assumed that you have a high school diploma or GED of some sort. And so you don't need to include it. Just don't even waste the space. Just move right into the college stuff. If you're working towards a degree, let's say you have your associate degree and you're working towards a bachelor degree, then just put down that you are, that the degree is in progress, rather than putting a graduation date, put that you're working towards that degree. You can include partial college information. There's nothing wrong with that. And then the next section down, which might be more of a last section, depending on how much information you have, would include your licensure. So what state you're licensed in. The license number might be optional. You don't have to include that. I think it helps people. It helps employers to be able to look you up so that they can verify your license. They're required to do that by law, and so that just saves them a step. You want to list any other additional licenses and certifications, such as CPR or local anesthesia, if that's something that you have. Nitrous oxide might be one. Diode lasers, again, that's a certification that a lot of hygienists have, so that would be something you might want to include. Dates of renewal are not necessary to include. In fact, to avoid having to keep changing that on your resume all the time, I would just leave it off, and just, if you want, you can just say you're current in all of those. That's just perfectly fine to do that. And then there's other things that you could include if you still, excuse me, if you still have space in your resume. Just include other items that might be relevant to dental hygiene, to clinical dental hygiene. It might be volunteer work, community service work, public health work, memberships within associations, or ADHA and things like that. Leadership roles that you've had within ADHA or other local components. You could include a section on articles that you've written or presentations that you've delivered or significant additional education. Again, all your CE, that is not necessary to put on a resume. In fact, on a resume, I would leave it off unless it's something really significant or substantial that helps the employer know that you're particularly proficient at something. Maybe it's periodontal training of some sort that you went through. You don't have to include that, but for a CV, if you're applying for an academic position, you may want to include a lot more of that CE information, and so you'll want to keep it handy. You don't necessarily have to have it on a resume, more or less just your CV if you have one. And then last little point I wanted to cover is, what if you don't have any dental work history? That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, everybody starts somewhere. But I do tell people, include your non-dental work. It may not be dental, but it's still relevant in the sense that you've been employed and employable, and that you've worked for somebody. So that is relevant to some extent. You want to include any dental hygiene sub work that you've done or temping work that you've done on its own separate line, or it could be as part of a kind of an overall. I've done temping for lots of different offices, and here's the date range that I've done them. You don't have to keep track of every single temping assignment. You don't have to put every single one of them on your resume. You can put that more of that general statement. But if you're just starting off, maybe you want to put, I did 3 months of maternity subbing at this office, or something along those lines. That's perfectly fine to do that. You could also include your externship work that you've done outside the clinic. Maybe you worked at a VA hospital or in a public health clinic, and so you could list that as a part of your work history. You could also list and include your school clinic, where you went to school. You obviously had a clinic where you did a lot of work there, so put it there. Make sure that you list that you weren't an actual dental hygienist, that you were a dental hygiene student would be your job title. But nevertheless, it helps to kind of fill in your work history and show them that, hey, yeah, I am qualified, I am trained. It kind of is a little reminder of that when you don't have any other experience. And then once you begin working professionally for 2 to 3 years, you can remove those externships in the school clinic, and maybe even some of the non-dental work that you've done over the years. It's not as relevant for other clinical jobs, and you've already established yourself as a clinician. You don't need it. So anyway, that's it for that particular video. Thank you again for watching. I hope you picked up some things that will help you kind of put together your resume. I forgot to include a homework assignment, so I think it would be pretty obvious though that I want you to build a resume. I want you to start putting together your work history that you would have, your education history, some skills that you have, some bullet points on that, and kind of have fun with it. Play around with the design a little bit. Make it something that looks like it would really stand out for somebody and represent you really well. Again, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you at the next video.